The morning Mara Ashworth collapsed at the gate of St. Catherine's Primary School, she had not eaten in 2 days. Not because there was no food. There was food. There were the eggs Derek had scrambled for himself and left crusting in the pan, and the last 2 slices of bread he'd told her not to touch, and the apple Lily had pressed into her mother's hands at breakfast with the solemn gravity of a 6-year-old who already understood, without anyone ever saying so, that her mother needed looking after. Mara had eaten half the apple standing at the sink, with her back to the kitchen, so Derek wouldn't see. She hadn't slept, either. Not really. She'd lain still beside her husband in the dark and listened to him breathe, and made herself as small as possible, which was a skill she had perfected over 4 years of marriage until she had become almost invisible in her own home. The morning had gone the way mornings always went. Derek in the bathroom for 45 minutes while Lily needed the toilet and Mara held her daughter on her hip and whispered, "It's okay, baby, just a little longer." Derek at the table, irritated by noise, irritated by Lily's cereal going soggy, irritated by the specific sound of Mara's shoes on the kitchen floor. Mara had learned to move quietly. She moved quietly now without even thinking about it, the way some people learn to breathe in certain rooms. She'd walk Lily to school because Derek had the car. She always walked. It was 20 minutes in good weather and 40 in rain, and it had been raining for 3 days. If you're already caught up in this story, hit that like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to them. She was wearing the coat with the broken zipper because the other one, the good one, the one that actually kept out the cold, had a tear along the left sleeve that Derek said was her own fault for not being more careful with her things. She tried to mend it twice. The thread kept pulling. She hadn't bought new thread because Derek monitored the bank account and asked about every purchase above $5, and she had not been able to explain why she needed thread without him turning it into an argument about how she wasted money, how she couldn't manage basic household responsibilities, how he provided everything and she managed nothing. So she wore the coat with the broken zipper, and she walked Lily to school in the rain. The bruises on her ribs had been there for 6 days. 3 of them were so deep they had gone from purple to a yellowish green at the edges, the kind of color that meant the body was trying to heal something it hadn't been asked to handle. She breathed shallowly because deep breaths hurt, and she moved slowly because fast movement hurt, and she smiled at Lily when her daughter looked up at her, because Lily didn't need to know. Lily never needed to know. She was 6 years old with her mother's dark eyes and her father's determined chin, and she carried her school bag with both straps over her shoulders the way Mara had shown her. Lily was careful about things like that, careful and watchful in ways that children should not have to be. She noticed when her mother winced. She noticed when her father's voice went flat. She had learned, at 6, to read a room. Mara hated that. She hated it more than anything Derek had ever done to her, that Lily had already learned to be afraid. St. Catherine's Primary School sat on the corner of Aldwych Street and Morrow Lane, a red brick building with iron railings and a wooden sign that had been repainted so many times the letters were slightly raised. The school gate opened at 8:45. Mara was always there before that, because being late was another thing Derek would find out about and another thing he would hold. She stood in the queue of parents in the rain and held Lily's hand and tried not to let the dizziness show. It had started somewhere around the 20-minute mark of the walk, that particular kind of dizziness that came from the combination of not sleeping, not eating, and breathing shallowly for 6 days. It had sat at the edges of her vision, that slight smearing of the world, the sense that everything was happening a half-second behind where it should be. She had ignored it, the way she ignored most of her body's complaints now, which had become a very long list. The gate opened. Parents moved forward. Lily pulled at her hand and said, "Mama, I can see Daisy," and pointed to a girl across the playground with a red umbrella. Mara bent to kiss her daughter's head. "Be good," she said. "Listen to your teacher." Lily looked at her for a moment with those serious dark eyes. "Are you okay, Mama?" "I'm fine, baby. Go on." She watched Lily run across the wet tarmac to join her friend, watched the small, determined figure with the careful backpack, and felt the rush of love that was always threaded through with terror. That mixed love and terror was the texture of her entire life now. She didn't know when one had stopped being separate from the other. She straightened. The world tilted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It was the kind of tilt that gives a person just enough time to think, "Oh, and then nothing. She went down onto one knee first, catching herself against the iron railing, her hands slipping on the wet metal. A woman nearby said something. Mara heard it from very far away. She was trying to stand back up, was sure she could stand back up, was putting everything she had into the very simple task of getting her legs under her, and then the ground came up to meet her, and she stopped trying. She didn't lose consciousness entirely. That was the strange thing about it. She remembered all of it later in fragments that she would piece together slowly over the days that followed. She remembered the cold, wet pavement under her cheek. She remembered the sound of voices getting louder. She remembered someone's hands on her shoulders, careful, steadying, and someone else saying, "Call an ambulance," and someone else saying, "Is she breathing?" She remembered wanting to say, "Yes, I'm breathing. I'm fine. This is nothing. Please don't make a fuss," and she remembered a voice, low and very quiet, that cut through all the other noise. "Step back. Give her air." Not loud, not a shout. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud because it was used to being listened to, and everything in its cadence assumed that it would be. The crowd of parents parted. Mara could feel it happen even with her eyes still closed. Then hands again different from the first ones. These were steadier. She felt herself being lifted, not quickly, not roughly, but with the kind of absolute certainty that made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, like whoever was holding her knew exactly what they were doing. She opened her eyes. A man was crouched over her, one knee on the wet pavement, which said something about him that she didn't have the clarity to analyze yet. He was dark-haired, somewhere in his late 30s, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Mara had spent on clothes in 3 years. His face was angular and serious, and his eyes dark, still, watching her with an intensity that was not alarming but was not nothing. Either were the first thing about him she could actually see clearly. He looked at her face, and then he looked lower, at the collar of her coat, which had shifted during the fall, and at the edge of her jaw where the bruise Derek had given her 8 days ago had faded to that yellow-green color but was still visible in certain light. And then something in his expression changed. Not visibly, not in any way she could have pointed to later and said, "There, that was the moment." His face stayed still. He stayed controlled. But something moved behind his eyes that was different from before, and it was that shift, small and contained and absolute, that she would come back to again and again in the weeks to come. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question had 2 meanings. She understood both of them. She answered the simpler one. "I'm fine. I'm sorry. I haven't eaten." He held her gaze for another half-second. Then he nodded once and said to someone behind him, "Get the car." The car was a black vehicle, long and well-maintained, with a driver who appeared without being summoned. The man, she didn't know his name yet, would not know it for another 20 minutes, helped her to her feet with the same steady certainty he'd used to hold her, and guided her through the small knot of concerned parents, and opened the back door. "You don't have to," Mara said. She said it because it was what she was supposed to say, not because she had any real capacity to resist. Her legs were still uncertain under her, and the dizziness hadn't fully cleared, and somewhere in the back of her mind the part of her that had been managing everything alone for 4 years had already done the calculation and concluded that she did not, in fact, have a better option right now. "I know," he said. "Get in." She got in. His name was Luca Valente. She learned this gradually, the way you learn things about a person when both of you are being careful through what he chose to say and what he didn't. He told his driver to find somewhere she could eat. He gave her a bottle of water from a compartment in the door and waited while she drank it. He sat on his side of the car without crowding her, which she noticed, because Derek occupied space the way certain storms did, as if the air itself needed to rearrange around him. Luca Valente did not occupy her space. He occupied his own, completely and without apology, and left her the rest. "Who did that?" he said finally. They had pulled up outside a small cafe on a quiet street, and the driver had gotten out, and they were alone in the car. Mara looked at her hands. "I fell." "No." His voice was even, unhurried. "Try again." She looked at him, then this stranger who had held her while she was on the ground, and who was sitting across from her now with his dark eyes steady and his hands resting loose on his knees. And for one brief and absolutely irrational moment, she considered telling him the truth. Then she thought about Derek, about Lily, about the way Derek had looked at her the last time she had said something she shouldn't have, and she closed that moment off and locked it. "I need to go home," she said. "Thank you for helping me, but I need to go home." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Eat something first." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was just a statement of what was going to happen next, said in the tone of a man who had long ago stopped asking for things when it was simpler to arrange them. She ate. The cafe was small and warm, a corner place with steamed-up windows and mismatched chairs. The driver had ordered before they came in, which meant there was already tea and a plate of scrambled eggs and toast waiting at a table in the back. Luca Valente sat across from her while she ate and said nothing, and she was too hungry to argue about any of it. She ate the eggs and the toast and drank the tea, and something in her body that had been held rigid for days began, very slightly, to ease. She watched him while she ate. He was watching the door. Not anxiously, not even obviously, just the way certain people monitored exits and entrances as a matter of habit, as naturally as breathing the way her father had always checked under the car every morning before driving, a reflex from a lifetime of assuming that threats could come from anywhere. She thought, this is not an ordinary man. She had understood this from the moment she'd heard him speak in the crowd outside the school, from the way everyone around him had responded as if gravity had shifted. But sitting across from him in a warm cafe, watching him watch the door, she understood it more specifically. This was a man who was used to danger, who had organized his entire life around the management of it. "Thank you," she said when the plate was empty. She meant it. He looked at her then. "How long has it been going on?" She set down her fork. "Please don't. I'm not asking for any other reason than to understand what I'm looking at. You don't need to understand it. It's not your concern." He tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they have thought about whether or not to say something and have decided they will. Then he pushed back his sleeve and showed her the inside of his left forearm, where a scar ran in a pale diagonal line old enough to be settled but unmistakable. "My father," he said, "until I was 17. Mara looked at the scar. Looked at him. "I know what a person looks like when they've been managing something alone for a long time," he said. "I know the shape of it. The way you hold yourself. The way you answered before I could finish asking." She said nothing. "I'm not asking you to tell me anything," he said, "but I want you to know that I see it." The words landed in a way she wasn't prepared for. Not because they were dramatic, they weren't, but because no one had said anything like that to her in a very long time. "I see it. I see you. Not I feel sorry for you. Not you should leave him. Not why don't you just. I see it." Her throat got tight. She looked away. "I have a daughter," she said finally. "I have to get home." He didn't argue. He had the driver take her to the end of her street, not to the door. She wouldn't let him take her to the door, and when she got out, he handed her a small card through the window. It had a phone number on it. Nothing else. "In case," he said. She took the card. She told herself she would throw it away when she got inside. She didn't throw it away. She put it in the lining of the coat with the broken zipper. In the small inner pocket, she kept her keys in, and she folded it in half so it fit flat against the seam. When Derek asked where she had been and why Lily's teacher had called the house, she told him she'd slipped on the wet pavement outside the school, and a passerby had helped her up, and she'd waited until she felt steady enough to walk home. He looked at her for a long time with those flat, evaluating eyes. Then he said she should be more careful, and walked back to the living room and turned the television on, and Mara went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and breathed in and breathed out and told herself what she always told herself. That it was fine. That she was managing. That Lily was okay. That it was enough. She did not fully believe it anymore, but she hadn't found anything to replace it with yet. Luca Valente had a niece at St. Catherine's primary school. Her name was Sophia, and she was 7 years old, and she had her mother's laugh and her uncle's stubbornness, and she was the only person in Luca's life who could make him cancel a meeting without guilt. He'd been at the school that morning because Sophia's mother, his sister Elena, had asked him to handle school drop-off for the week while she recovered from surgery. He'd arranged his schedule around it without complaint. Sophia was the single uncomplicated thing in his life, and he protected uncomplicated things fiercely. He had not expected the woman at the gate. He had noticed her before she collapsed. He noticed most things. It was the habit of a man who had survived by paying attention, but he had noticed her specifically because of the way she moved. Very carefully, very controlled. The kind of movement that had learned to protect something that hurt. He recognized it the same way he recognized most dangers. Not from theory, from memory. When she went down, he was already moving, his body deciding before his mind caught up, and when he reached her and his hand went to her shoulder to steady her, and he saw the side of her jaw. He felt something go cold and still inside him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He'd put her in his car and told himself he was just making sure she was all right, the way anyone would. And he had almost believed it until he was sitting across from her in the cafe, watching her eat like someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to, and thinking about the way she'd said "I fell" with absolutely no hesitation, no pause to consider. Just the automatic reflex of a lie told so many times it had become the first available truth. He drove back across the city with a great number of things demanding his attention that were not Mara Ashworth, whose name he didn't know yet, but whose face he could not stop returning to. He found out her name through the school. He had enough relationships with enough people that this was not difficult. He found out she lived on Calloway Street, that she had one daughter in year 2 named Lily, and that her emergency contact was her husband, a man named Derek Ashworth, who was listed as the primary account holder on the school's parent portal and who had, according to the school secretary, called twice in the past year to complain about teachers. He found out more through other channels. Derek Ashworth was 34 years old. He worked in insurance, mid-level management, nothing remarkable. He owned the house on Calloway Street outright, had inherited it from his parents, which meant it was his and not hers. No criminal record. A colleague at work had filed a noise complaint against him 3 years ago that had come to nothing. A neighbor on the right side had called the police once, 18 months ago, about a disturbance. The police had come. They had noted that the woman in the house had declined to make a statement. They had left. Lucas sat in his study with this information spread across his desk and felt the cold thing inside him get colder. He told himself this was not his business. He thought about the bruise on her jaw, the careful way she breathed, the flat reflexive quality of the lie. He thought about his mother, who had moved the same way, who had said fell the same way, who had managed and managed and managed until there was nothing left of her to manage anything. He told himself again that this was not his business. He picked up his phone. His man, Gio, picked up on the second ring. "Find out everything you can about Derek Ashworth," Lucas said. "Calloway Street. Insurance. I want to buy tonight." He hung up and turned back to the other business requiring his attention because it was urgent and had real consequences and required his actual focus. He still thought about her face all the way through. Gio called back at 9 that evening. Derek Ashworth was, as far as official records went, an unremarkable man. But Gio had eyes beyond official records, and what he found there was less unremarkable. The neighbor who had called police 18 months ago was a woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had since moved away. Gio had found her. She'd been brief on the phone, the particular brevity of someone who had learned that getting involved had costs. "I heard her crying," Mrs. Okafor had said. Not normal crying. The other kind. A woman at Lily's school, another parent, had mentioned to a friend who had mentioned to Joe's source that Mara Ashworth never came to parent events, that she always looked tired, that she never met anyone for coffee even though several people had asked. Mara's own record was clean, sparse, the record of someone who stayed invisible. A part-time job at a florist she'd left 2 years ago. No current employment. A savings account in her name with almost nothing in it. Last transaction 18 months ago. 18 months, Luca thought. When Mrs. Okafor had called the police. When whatever happened that night had happened. Gio said, "She doesn't have access to the main accounts. He controls all of it. I talked to someone who knows someone who went to school with her old friend, lost touch about 4 years ago when she got married. Said Mara was different before. Said she used to be the one who called everyone, who made plans, who filled a room. What happened 4 years ago? She married Derek Ashworth." Luca put the phone down. He had built his empire on the understanding that the world was full of people who used power as a weapon, who took from those who couldn't fight back and called it prerogative. He had built it, in fact, partly because of this understanding, because of his father and his mother and the particular education of watching someone you love endure something preventable. He was not a good man. He knew this. He did not mistake himself for one. But he had rules, clear and unbreakable. And the man on Calloway Street was, from everything Luca could see, the kind of man those rules existed because of. He sat in the silence of his study for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and sent one message to Gio. "Keep watching the house." He did not ask himself why. He already knew why. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. 3 days later, Mara came to the school gate again. He was there because Sophia had a parents' evening he was covering for Elena. He arrived early by habit, stood near the gate, and saw her come around the corner with Lily's hand in hers. The thing in his chest that he had been carefully not naming did something inconvenient. She looked better than she had 3 days ago. She'd eaten. He could tell. She was steadier, but she was wearing the same coat with the broken zipper, and she was walking with that same careful protection of her left side. And when Lily ran to join the other children at the gate, Mara stood alone by the railing and pulled her coat tighter and stared at nothing. He crossed to her before he'd made the decision to. She saw him coming and went very still, the way small animals do when they've identified a threat and haven't decided yet whether to run. "I'm not going to cause you any trouble," he said. "I just wanted to know if you were all right." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" He considered the question. It was a fair one. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about it," he said. Which was true, and simpler than the rest of it. Something shifted in her face. She looked away across the playground to where Lily was crouched in conversation with another child, their small heads bent together over something in the grass. "She's okay," Mara said. "Lily, she's happy." He understood the meaning of that. She was telling him what mattered, what she was protecting, what she had organized everything around. "What about you?" he asked. She didn't answer. She watched her daughter in the pale winter sunlight and said nothing. And in the silence between them, Luca understood more than she'd said. He stood beside her for a few minutes. Not crowding, not pressing, just there. When the bell rang and the children came rushing out, Sophia appeared at his side, took his hand without ceremony, and said, "Uncle Luca, I need to tell you about what happened with the bird in the classroom." He bent to her level and listened seriously, because Sophia's stories deserved serious attention. He was aware, as he listened, of Mara watching him. He was aware when Lily came running to her mother's side and took her hand and said, "I drew you a picture, Mama," and Mara's entire face changed, opened in a way it hadn't once since he'd met her. That was what he would remember later. The way her face changed when Lily came to her. The love in it, unguarded, the one moment in which she seemed to forget to be careful. He thought, she is fighting very hard for that little girl. He thought, she should not have to fight this hard. Sophia pulled at his hand. "Uncle Luca, are you listening?" "I'm listening," he said. "Tell me about the bird." He did not look at Mara again as she walked away. He didn't need to. He had already made the decision he'd been not making for 3 days. He had decided she was going to be looked after, whether she knew it yet or not. The card was still in her coat. She checked for it every morning when she put the coat on. The way she checked for her keys and the money she kept separate from the household account in a change purse she'd had since before she was married. The change purse held 42 pounds, which she had assembled over the course of 8 months by keeping the change from grocery shopping and putting it aside a few coins at a time in the pocket of the coat with the broken zipper. Derek never checked coat pockets. He checked the shopping receipts and the bank statements in her phone, but not coat pockets. 42 pounds. She had done the math many times. It was enough for 3 nights in the cheapest accommodation she could find, or 1 week of food, or a bus ticket to her sister's house 3 hours away if she was willing to take the local routes that stopped at every market town along the way. She had thought about the bus. She had thought about it in the specific, careful way she thought about all escape routes, not as a plan, exactly, because a plan meant intention, and intention meant she would have to do it, which meant she would have to choose, which meant she had to accept what she was choosing between. She thought about the bus in the abstract, in the theoretical, in the place in her mind that was separate from the actual texture of her days, which was Derek's face when she'd gotten something wrong, and the specific quality of silence that preceded certain things, and the way Lily had learned to eat quietly. The card stayed in the lining. She told herself she kept it because throwing it away would require explanation. If Derek found it in the bin, he went through the bin sometimes, looking for receipts she'd hidden or packaging that suggested a purchase she hadn't mentioned, and that telling him she'd thrown away a random business card would itself be suspicious. This was a lie she told herself convincingly. She was getting good at that. The truth was simpler and harder. The truth was that someone had said, "I see it," and meant it, and she had been seen so rarely in the past 4 years that even the memory of being seen felt like something she needed to keep. The following week was unremarkable in the way that bad weeks often were, each day identical in its specific texture of walking carefully and managing carefully and loving Lily fiercely and quietly in all the spaces Derek left empty. On Thursday, Derek came home from work in a mood she recognized, not from anything he did. From the quality of his silence when he came through the door, the particular weight of it. She had learned to read him the way sailors learn to read, whether not from what it was yet, but from what it was building toward. She made dinner without speaking. She made sure Lily was upstairs. She said the right things at the right moments, the careful, calibrated things that sometimes, not always, but sometimes navigated around the edges of whatever was building in him. It worked that night. The mood passed the way moods sometimes did, dissipating without landing. He ate and watched television and went to bed, and Mara sat in the kitchen afterward and let herself breathe. She was sitting there, her tea going cold in her hands, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single message. "How are you?" No question mark. It read like a statement, like an observation, like the person sending it already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. She sat with the phone in her hands for a long moment. Then she typed, "Fine." 3 minutes later, "You don't have to say fine." She looked at the words. Her chest did something complicated. She typed, "Who is this?" She knew who it was. She was asking anyway, the way you sometimes need someone to say a thing out loud so it becomes real. The response took a minute. "Luca Valente. You have my card." She had his card. She had kept his card in the lining of her coat for 11 days. She should have put the phone down. Should have gone to bed. She was exhausted and she had to be up at 6 and Lily needed her lunch made and the washing hadn't been done and there were 100 things waiting to be done before morning. She typed, "It's late." "I know. You're awake though." She looked at that. She thought about the way he'd stood beside her at the school gate without crowding her, watching Sophia, with the same serious attention he'd given to everything else. She typed, "What do you want?" A longer pause this time. Then, "To know you're all right. That's all." She stared at those words for a long moment. She thought about the last time someone had wanted to know if she was all right and meant it without wanting something in return. She typed, "I'm managing." 3 dots appeared, the indicator of someone typing. Then, "That's not the same as all right." She put the phone face down on the table and sat in the kitchen with her cold tea and the sound of the house settling around her, and the knowledge that somewhere in the city a man she barely knew had sat down and sent her a message at 11 o'clock at night for no other reason than to check on her. She didn't reply, but she didn't delete the message, either. She sat there for a long time. Then she went to bed, and she lay in the dark, and she let herself think for the first time in months about what it would mean to be actually all right. Not managing. Not fine. Actually all right. The thought was so unfamiliar it scared her. She thought about it anyway. She did not know yet that Luca Valente was lying in his own bed at that same hour, watching the ceiling with his hands behind his head, thinking about a woman in a coat with a broken zipper. She did not know that Gio had a man watching the end of her street quietly, in a car that changed every few days so as not to be noticed. She did not know that when Luca had read her message on managing, he had sat for a long time in the silence of his study, and that he had made a second decision after the first one. That was quieter but more absolute. She only knew that tomorrow she would wake up and make Lily's lunch and walk to school in the coat with the broken zipper, and that somewhere in the lining of her inner pocket there was a card with a phone number on it, and that tonight, for the first time in weeks, she did not feel entirely alone. It was a small thing, but small things, she had learned, were the ones that kept you alive. She replied to his message the next morning. Not right away. She made Lily's lunch first and walked her to school, and stood at the gate in the thin winter sunlight watching the small determined figure disappear through the doors, and then she stood there for another minute doing nothing at all, which was a thing she rarely allowed herself. Then she took out her phone. She typed, "I'm managing better today." She looked at what she'd written, deleted it, typed, "Thank you for checking." Deleted that, too. Stood in the pale morning cold for another 30 seconds, and then typed, "The eggs helped," and sent it before she could think any more about it. She put her phone in her pocket and walked home. His response came an hour later, while she was folding laundry on the bed. "Glad to hear it. The cafe opens at 8 if you need it again." She read the message twice. It was not an invitation, exactly. It was not pressure or expectation. It was just a door left open, the way certain people left doors without ceremony, without fanfare, just unlocked and available. She folded a small sock that belonged to Lily and thought about doors. They texted after that. Not often. Not in a way that could be called a pattern, which mattered, because Derek sometimes looked at her phone and she needed to be able to explain anything on it, and a pattern would have been harder to explain than an occasional unremarkable exchange. She kept the messages brief and surface level, and she deleted them after, and she was aware of the care she was taking and what it said about her situation that this a handful of messages with a near stranger required the management of a small operation. He seemed to understand without being told. He never sent more than one message in a row. He never asked questions she would have had to lie to answer. He said things like, "Sophia told me today that the bird in the classroom turned out to be a pigeon. She has named it Gerald." He said, "I passed a florist on the way to a meeting. Thought of you." He said, "Eat something today." Just that. Eat something today. She had told him, in a message she almost didn't send, that she'd worked at a florist before Lily was born. Before the marriage had swallowed everything she used to be. He had said, "What kind of flowers did you like best?" She had thought about it for longer than the question probably deserved. Then she typed, "Sweet peas. They're not very dramatic, but they smell like something real." He sent back a single word, "Good." She didn't know what it meant. She kept it anyway. Joe's man on Callaway Street was a quiet person named Dante who drove a different car every 3 days and read paperbacks while he waited. He had done this kind of work for Luca for 6 years and was very good at disappearing in plain sight, which was the most useful skill in his particular line. He called Gio on a Wednesday evening with a report that Gio relayed to Luca within the hour. The husband came home at 6, Dante said. He was on the phone when he arrived, and he was already angry about something before he got through the door. The light in the kitchen stayed on until about 9. Then the downstairs went dark. That's all tonight, Gio said. But the night before, there was shouting. Dante couldn't make out words, but it went on for about 20 minutes, and then stopped. Luca sat with that. "Is she all right?" "She came out this morning to walk the girl to school. Moving okay. But Dante said she had her arm across her ribs on the walk back." Luca's jaw tightened. He set down the glass he was holding with very deliberate care, because the alternative was to do something with his hands that he wasn't ready to do yet. "Keep watching," he said, "and Gio find out where Derek Ashworth drinks." "Where he drinks?" "His usual place. Friday nights." Gio was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he understood what was being planned even if it hadn't been said. "Then, I'll find out." He found out by the next afternoon. A pub called the White Hart on Clement Street, 2 roads from Derek Ashworth's office, where Derek went most Fridays after work and occasionally on Thursdays when the week had been, in his own words to a colleague, a lot. Luca filed this away with the calm efficiency of a man who had spent his adult life building dossiers on people without always intending to use them immediately, because immediate was rarely the right time. He waited. What he was waiting for, he told himself, was clarity. He needed to understand the full shape of the situation before he moved, because moving too early or too visibly would make things worse for her, and making things worse for her was not something he was willing to do. He had seen, in his years of operating in the spaces where power was used against the powerless, what happened when someone intervened badly. The women who went back, the situations that escalated, the ways that help, without careful handling, became another kind of damage. So he waited and he watched, and he texted her about pigeon names and told her to eat. And he did not tell her about Dante on the end of her street because she would feel surveilled and she had been controlled enough. He told himself this was patience. He was mostly right. The thing that made him stop waiting happened on a Friday. Dante called Gio at 2 in the afternoon, and Gio called Luca, and Luca listened to what Dante had seen that morning and felt the cold thing inside him that had been sitting there for 2 weeks lock into place like a door being bolted. The girl missed school, Dante said. The mother took her in, but Lily had her arm in a sling, and the mother was walking like something hurt more than usual. A couple of the other parents asked. The mother smiled and said Lily had fallen off a bicycle. Joe's voice went careful. The girl doesn't have a bicycle. Dante checked. There's no bicycle in the back garden, none in the garage. She's 6 years old, and there's no bicycle anywhere on the property. Luca was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Find out when Derek Ashworth leaves his office today." "He leaves most Fridays around 5:30, Gio said. "I'll be at the White Hart at 6. Luca arrived at the pub at 5:50. He sat at the bar and ordered a whiskey he didn't drink and watched the door in the way he watched all doors with the patient, absolute attention of someone for whom exits and entrances had always mattered. Derek Ashworth came in at 6:12. He was a medium-height man with sandy hair going thin at the crown, the kind of face that photographed blandly, the kind of build that suggested a younger self who'd been athletic and hadn't kept up with it. He came in with a colleague, spoke to the barmaid by name. ordered without looking at the menu. The ease of a man on familiar ground. He settled at a table near the window. Talked about work things. Luca could hear fragments. A contract, a colleague, a complaint about parking. Ordinary. Unremarkable. The kind of man who, in any other setting, you would look at and see nothing. Luca picked up his glass and walked over. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood at the edge of their table and waited until Derek looked up. And when Derek looked up and registered what he was looking at, Luca's particular brand of stillness, the coat, the eyes, the complete absence of any readable social CU, his colleague suddenly found something very important to attend to at the bar. Derek Ashworth was alone. "Can I help you?" Derek said, the tone of a man who thought his standing gave him leverage. Luca sat down across from him. "Your daughter has a broken arm," he said. Derek's expression shifted. "Who are you?" "The arm is broken and there's no bicycle in your garden." Derek's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you. Mara has had 4 visible injuries in the past 3 weeks. Luca's voice was very quiet. Very even the tone he used when he wanted someone to understand that the volume was irrelevant. "Your wife. The woman who walks your daughter to school and comes home alone. For visible injuries in 3 weeks. I know this because I have been paying attention." Derek said nothing. He had gone the particular color of someone who has understood something and hasn't decided yet how to respond to it. Luca leaned forward very slightly. "I want you to hear this clearly," he said, "so there is no confusion later about what I mean. I am going to give you one opportunity to think carefully about how things go from here. That opportunity will not come again. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Derek found his voice. "You have no idea who you're." "I know exactly who I am," Luca said. "The question is whether you do." He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Derek Ashworth one more time along, still looked that measured, and found everything it needed to find, and then he walked out of the pub and got into the car and said nothing to Romano the whole way back. That night, Lucas sent Mara a message. "I need you to know that you are not alone in this. That's all. You don't have to respond." She didn't respond that night. But in the morning earlier than she usually wrote, before the school run, before Derek was up, a single message appeared on his phone. "What did you do?" Not a question. The same cadence as his own messages, he noticed. A statement shaped like one. He typed, "I had a conversation." 3 dots. Then, with Derek? He considered how much to say. Then yes. The dots appeared and disappeared twice before her reply came. "He's going to be angry." Luca typed, "Let him be angry at me." Another long pause. Then, "You don't understand what he's like." He typed back immediately, because this was the thing he needed her to understand more than anything else. "I understand exactly what he's like. And he needs to understand what I'm like." She didn't reply for a long time. Long enough that he set the phone down and poured coffee and stood at the window of his kitchen looking out at the city, waking up, thinking about a woman in a house 3 miles away, reading a message and deciding what to do with it. His phone buzzed. "Why are you doing this?" He thought about the answer. The real one, not the surface one. He typed, "Because someone should have done it sooner. And I'm sorry they didn't." If you're as deep into this story as I am right now, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. I upload new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Your support is the reason I keep going. Now, back to them. The days that followed were very quiet. Too quiet. In the way that certain silences were not the absence of noise, but the held breath before something, the particular hush of a situation gathering itself. Derek didn't touch her. He was present in the house in all the ways he usually was: eating dinner, watching television, taking the car in the morning, but he was careful in a way he hadn't been before. He watched her differently, not with the flat evaluating look she knew, but with something new underneath it. Something that flickered at the edges and looked, if she was reading it right, a great deal like uncertainty. She did not tell Luca this. She didn't tell him much, still. But she had stopped deleting the messages, and she had stopped pretending she was going to. She asked him once, carefully, "How do you know he won't just be worse because of it?" He answered, "Because I gave him a reason not to be." She thought about that for a long time. She thought about the specific kind of reason that could make a man like Derek Ashworth pause, and she thought about what kind of man could provide it, and she thought about the way Luca Valente had looked at her across a cafe table and said, "I know what a person looks like when they've been managing something alone for a long time." She thought about whether she was making a terrible mistake. She thought about Lily's arm in the sling. She had told the hospital it was a fall. She had said it without flinching because she'd had practiced saying things like that without flinching. The nurse had looked at her for a moment too long, the way nurses sometimes did, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been trained to recognize things they aren't officially permitted to simply name. Mara had smiled and answered the follow-up questions and taken the leaflet about physiotherapy and walked Lily home. And that night, after Lily was in bed, she had gone to the bathroom and turned on the tap and sat on the edge of the bath for 20 minutes doing nothing at all. She had not cried. She didn't know when she'd stopped being able to cry somewhere in the past 2 years, she thought, when crying had started to feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. But she had sat on the edge of the bath and felt the full weight of what was happening, and she had thought for the first time in a long time, I cannot keep doing this. Not I will leave. Not I have a plan. Just the simple, devastating clarity of, I cannot keep doing this. The card was still in her pocket. She touched it and thought, one phone call. Just one. She didn't make the call. Not yet. But she kept touching the card. On a Thursday morning, 10 days after Luca's visit to the pub, she arrived at the school gate with Lily and found a paper bag sitting on the railing at the spot where she always stood. She almost walked past it. Then she saw the small sticker on the front, a tiny flower. Simple, hand-drawn by someone who clearly didn't draw much, and she stopped. She opened the bag. Inside was a coffee in a takeaway cup, still hot, and a small wax paper package that turned out to contain 2 shortbread biscuits pressed into the shape of sweet peas. She stood at the school gate holding a coffee and 2 biscuits shaped like the flowers she'd told him were her favorite, and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. She looked around. She didn't see him. She hadn't expected to. She ate the biscuits standing at the gate, and she drank the coffee while Lily played in the yard, and she thought about a man who had listened when she said sweet peas are not very dramatic, but they smell like something real, and who had remembered it, and who had done something with that memory that was so small and so careful that she could receive it without it demanding anything from her in return. She went home and typed, "That was you." He replied. Sophia helped pick the tin. She is very serious about biscuits. She smiled at her phone, the physical shape of her face doing something it hadn't done in a while. She typed, "They were very good biscuits." "Good," he sent back. She sat with her phone and thought about how consistently he said that word good and how much weight he put in it without it ever sounding heavy. They met again on a Friday. Not by arrangement. He was at the school collecting Sophia for a dentist appointment, and she was at the gate with Lily, who had come out clutching a papier-mâché bowl she had made in art class and was extremely anxious about transporting safely. Mara was focused entirely on the structural integrity of the bowl when she heard his voice beside her. "I'd hold it from the bottom," he said. "Not the sides. It'll hold better." She looked up. He was standing there, hands in his pockets, watching Lily with the same serious interest he gave most things. Lily considered the advice. Then she adjusted her grip to hold the bowl from underneath, and her expression settled. Luca looked at Mara. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who had been having a conversation in fragments for weeks and were now simply in the same place as each other, and the conversation didn't need to restart because it had never actually stopped. "How is the arm?" he asked, nodding toward where Lily was now showing the bowl to a friend. "Better," Mara said. "She got the sling off Monday." "Good." She looked at him. "I haven't thanked you properly." "You don't need to." "I do, actually." She met his eyes. "Whatever you said to him, it's been different." He hasn't. She stopped. Started again. "I've been able to sleep," she said. "This week. A bit." She watched something move through his expression. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like relief. "I'm glad," he said. Lily appeared at Mara's side. "Mama, can Gerald the pigeon come to our house?" Mara blinked. "Who?" "He lives at the school. He's very tame. He eats from Daisy's hand." "I don't think Gerald would be happy living at our house," Mara said carefully. "He would be happy at our house," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of someone who has not yet learned that certainty requires evidence. "We could give him a place in the garden." Sophia appeared beside Luca, tugging his sleeve. "Did you hear? Gerald could live at Mara's house." "I heard," Luca said. "I don't think pigeons can be relocated against their will." Sophia considered this gravely. "Can we ask him?" "We'll ask him next week," Luca said. He said it with a complete straight face, and Mara looked at him, this man who ran things she still didn't fully understand, who had walked into a pub and said something to her husband that had made her able to sleep, who had sent her biscuits shaped like sweet peas, and felt something shift. Not a large thing. Not a dramatic thing. Just, oh, this is who he is, underneath everything else. A man who could tell a 7-year-old we'll ask the pigeon next week without a flicker of condescension, because the thing that mattered to Sophia mattered to him. They walked toward the gate together, the four of them, and Lily held her papier-mâché bowl from the bottom, and Sophia explained at length why Gerald the pigeon had a very expressive face for a bird, and Mara listened and felt, for a few minutes, something that was not managing, something that was just being somewhere, with people who were not a threat. At the gate, they split, Sophia toward the waiting car, Lily toward the walk home. Luca paused before he turned away. "Come for coffee," he said. "Not the cafe. My house, if you'd rather. You can bring Lily. There's a garden. She can see what a proper bird looks like versus Gerald." Mara hesitated. "You don't have to," he said. "I know." She thought about Derek, about the careful quiet of the past 10 days, about the 42 pounds in her change purse and the card in her lining and the bus she hadn't taken yet. She thought about sleeping this week. A bit. She thought about what it had felt like to have someone say "I see it" and mean it, and about what it might feel like to be somewhere that didn't require her to be careful. "Saturday," she said, "if Lily doesn't have anything on." He nodded. He gave her the address and got into the car, and the car pulled away, and Mara stood on the pavement in the winter afternoon with her daughter's hand in hers, and something warm sitting in her chest that she couldn't quite name yet. She named it later, lying in bed, listening to the house settle. It was hope. The specific, terrifying kind. The kind that arrives before you've decided you're ready for it. She told herself to be careful. She thought about the biscuits. Anyway, his house was not what she expected, although she wasn't sure what she'd expected. It was large and set back from a quiet street in a part of the city where the trees were old and the buildings were old, a pale stone house with good windows and a garden she could see from the gate. A real garden, not ornamental, with a kitchen section and climbing things against the back wall, and what looked like an ancient apple tree in the corner. Sophia met them at the door before they'd even reached it, which meant she had been watching for them. "You're Lily," Sophia said to Lily, with the directness of someone who had already decided what she thought of a person and saw no need to perform uncertainty. "I know about you from Gerald." Lily considered her. "I know about you from Gerald, too." There was a moment of mutual appraisal, the specific diplomacy of children who have decided they might like each other but aren't going to commit to it immediately. Then Sophia said, "Do you want to see the garden?" "Yes," Lily said, and they were gone. Mara stood in the hallway and looked at Luca, who was watching the two of them disappear through the back door with something that might have been satisfaction. "They'll be fine," he said. "Sophia knows where everything is. Come in." The kitchen was warm and smelled like something slow-cooked, and there was coffee already made and a plate of things on the table: bread, cheese, fruit, the kind of spread that a person puts together when they want to seem like it required no effort, but have clearly thought about it. She sat at the kitchen table and he poured coffee and sat across from her, and neither of them reached for something to fill the silence, which was, she realized, one of the things she found most unusual about being near him. He did not fill silences, he let them be what they were. "Are you all right?" he asked. Not the two meanings question this time. Just the one. "I think so," she said. She wrapped her hands around her mug. It's been calmer. This week." He said nothing, waited for her to find the rest. "It won't last, will it?" she said finally. She said it flatly, without drama, the way you state a thing you've been carrying long enough that it no longer requires feeling. "It's calm because he's uncertain, but that won't last on its own." "No," Lucas said, "that it won't last on its own." She looked up. "So what happens then?" He met her eyes. "Then I make sure it doesn't have to last on its own." She held his gaze for a moment. "You can't make this your problem indefinitely. You have things, you have a life, a business. You don't owe me this. I know." "Then why?" Luca looked at his coffee, then back at her. He seemed to be choosing how honest to be, which was a thing she recognized, the calibration of what to say and how much. "Because I was 17 when my father stopped," he said, "and the person who made him stop was someone who had no reason to get involved and got involved anyway." That he paused. "I've spent a lot of my life since then trying to understand that. Why someone would do something for no reason other than because it was the right thing." She said nothing. "I don't know if I've ever managed to be that person," he said. "Not even close, really. But I know what it felt like to be on the other side of it. To have someone step in. And I know what the alternative looks like. His voice stayed even, controlled, but there was something underneath it that had been there for a long time and had learned to live alongside the control without disrupting it. Mara looked at him. She thought about everything she'd been managing, and about how long she'd been managing it, and about the particular exhaustion of being strong enough to survive something, but not strong enough to stop it. "I'm going to have to leave," she said quietly. "At some point. I know that. I've known it for a while. I just haven't the money, and Lily, and I don't know where we'd go. And she goes to school here, and she finally has a friend she stopped. There are a lot of reasons. I know. Every time I think about it, I get as far as Lily's face, and then I can't think anymore." Lucas said, "What does Lily's face say?" She blinked. "When you think about leaving, what does her face say?" Mara thought about it. She thought about Lily running to her at the school gate with the picture she'd drawn. About Lily adjusting her grip on the papier-mâché bowl because the advice was good and Lily was practical about good advice. About Lily asking if Gerald the pigeon could come to their house, because Lily still believed the world would be organized according to what made sense. "She says, 'I'm okay if you are,'" Mara said softly. Luca nodded. "Then we make sure you're okay." They sat with that for a moment, the specific simplicity of a sentence that was also a promise. Then, from the garden, they heard Lily's voice carrying clearly through the back door. "Sophia, look, there's an apple still on the tree." And Sophia's voice, "It's been there all winter. Uncle Luca says it's either very brave or very confused." And Lily, "Seriously, I think it's both." Luca's face changed. The control was still there, it was always there, but around the edges something loosened, and Mara saw, for just a moment, the 17-year-old who had been waiting for someone to step in, and what it had done to him to wait, and what he'd built out of the waiting. She thought, "I'm going to trust this man." She hadn't trusted anyone in 4 years. The decision arrived not as a dramatic thing, not as a surrender, but as a quiet and absolute fact, the kind her body acknowledged before her mind caught up. She thought, "I don't know if that's wise." She thought, "It might be the first honest thing I've done in a very long time." The afternoon stretched long and unhurried. They drank coffee and talked about small things, and the girls came in and out of the kitchen with reports from the garden, a worm they'd found, a spider's web still intact on the apple tree, the structural soundness of a stick that Lily had decided was a walking stick and Sophia had decided was a sword, a disagreement resolved by making it both. At some point, without ceremony, Luca made lunch. He cooked the way he did most things, with a quiet competence that assumed no audience, and set food on the table and called the girls in, and they ate together, all 4 of them, in the warm kitchen with the old garden visible through the window. Mara watched Lily eat with appetite and talked to Sophia about Gerald the pigeon's facial expressions, and felt something in her chest that she recognized, finally, as grief. Grief for the version of her life that could have been like this. Ordinary and warm and unhurried. A table, food, a child eating without watching the door. She felt Luca look at her. She looked back. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask what she was thinking or try to fix the expression on her face. He just looked at her and let her be seen, and then he passed her the bread, and she took it. It was a small thing. She was getting better at understanding that small things were the whole of it. "She needs to know," he said to Gio that evening, after Romano had driven Mara and Lily home. Door to door, no argument accepted about taxis. "She needs to know there is somewhere to go. A real option. Not in theory." Gio said, "You have the house in Dunmore. And the apartment on the south side. Either one would work." "The house in Dunmore," Lucas said. "It's better for a child. There's space. A proper garden. You're sure about this?" Luca looked out the window at the city lit up in the dark. He thought about Lily adjusting her grip on a papier-mâché bowl because the advice was good and she was practical. He thought about Mara eating half an apple at a sink so her husband wouldn't see. He was sure. "Get it ready," he said, quietly, without any of it leading back to me in a way that could be used against her. Gio was quiet for a moment. "And Derek Ashworth?" Lucas said, "Not yet. But soon." He didn't sleep much that night. He lay in the dark and thought about things he didn't usually let himself think about, the specific arithmetic of cruelty, how it accumulated in people over years, how it changed the way they moved and spoke and ate and trusted, how it made people very good at lying about falling. He thought about Mara saying, "I'm going to have to leave." The quiet certainty of it, the way she'd said it like a fact she'd been sitting with for a long time, waiting until she believed she was allowed to say it out loud. He thought, She's almost ready, he thought. I need her to be ready before Derek Ashworth realizes that calm is not the same thing as resolved. Because Luca knew men like Derek Ashworth. He had known them all his life, had learned from an early age the particular trajectory of a man who used fear as leverage. The calm would hold only as long as the fear held, and fear, without consequence, had a short half-life. Derek was going to test it. Luca could feel it coming the way he felt most things, not from evidence, exactly, but from the accumulated pattern of everything he knew about how men like that moved in the world. He would wait until he felt sure of himself again, until the uncertainty wore off, until Mara seemed less watched, less protected. And then he would act, because that was what men like Derek Ashworth did. They pushed at the edges of what they thought they could get away with, and when the edges held, they pushed harder, and they kept pushing until something pushed back hard enough to make them stop. Luca intended to be that thing. But timing mattered. Timing always mattered. He sent her a message at 11:15. The house is beautiful in winter. Sophia would like Lily to come back and negotiate further with the apple tree. She replied 4 minutes later, which meant she was awake. Lily would like that, she wrote. And then, after a pause, I would too. He put down the phone and felt, for the first time in a long time, that what he was doing was exactly right. Not just managed. Not just strategic. Right. He had one more call to make before he slept. Romano, he said when it connected. Boss, I need you to find out what Derek Ashworth's schedule looks like next week. Every day? Every movement. Is this about the woman? Luca was quiet for a moment. Everything from here is about the woman, he said. Make sure Dante knows that, too. He ended the call and lay back in the dark and thought about a coat with a broken zipper and about what it meant that she had worn it in the cold every day for weeks rather than by thread, because thread was $5 and $5 had to be explained. He thought about 42 pounds and a change purse in a pocket. He thought, she has been trying to survive this alone. He thought, she will not have to survive it alone anymore. Tomorrow he would start making the arrangements that would give her somewhere real to go. Not charity. He understood that she would refuse charity, understood it in his bones the way he understood all the things that mattered to people in situations like hers. Not rescue, either. Just a door. Unlocked and available. The same way he'd been leaving doors since the night he first sat across from her in a warm cafe and watched her eat like someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to. Just a door. He would let her walk through it on her own terms. And when the time came, when Derek Ashworth finally confirmed what Luca already knew he would do, Luca would be there. Not as a rescuer. Not as a white knight. Not as anyone's idea of good. Just as someone who had decided, in the rain outside a school gate on an ordinary Wednesday morning, that this woman was going to be looked after, and who intended to keep that promise regardless of what it cost. He closed his eyes. He slept, finally, with that certainty settled in his chest like ballast. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and enormous and full of closed doors. And in a house on Calloway Street, a woman lay in the dark beside a man she feared and thought about apple trees, and bread passed across a table without ceremony, and a small card in the lining of a coat with a broken zipper. She thought, one phone call. She thought, maybe soon. She did not know that soon was already in motion, that a house was being readied 3 miles away, that a man lay awake thinking about timing. She only knew that the card was still there, and that she had not thrown it away, and that for the first time in 4 years she had eaten lunch at a table without watching the door. She held on to that. She went to sleep. It held for 11 days. 11 days of careful quiet, of Derek moving through the house like a man who had not yet decided what he was going to do next. 11 days of Mara breathing just slightly easier, of Lily sleeping through the night without waking, of mornings that did not begin with the particular weight of someone else's mood pressing down on everything. 11 days. On the 12th, Mara came home from the school run to find Derek already there. He didn't work from home. He never worked from home. His presence in the house at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, still in his coat, standing in the kitchen with his phone in his hand, was the kind of wrongness she felt in her ribs before she registered it in her mind. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. The expression on his face was not anger, not exactly. It was the expression she had learned to fear more than anger, the cold, arrived-at thing, the one that meant he had been thinking, that he had been building towards something while she was not watching, and now he was ready. Who is he? He said. Mara kept her face still. Who is who? Don't. His voice was flat. Don't manage me. Who is the man from the pub? She said, I don't know what you're talking about. He moved toward her, and she made herself stay in the doorway, made herself not step back, because stepping back was the wrong move, and she knew it, had learned years ago the specific grammar of his moods, and how each response shifted what came next. Someone saw you, he said, getting into a car. Outside the school. 3 weeks ago. She said nothing. Someone told me. He stepped closer. You've been lying to me this whole time. Slipping out. Meeting someone. Letting him come and talk to me like I have to. His voice cracked on the edge of something, and she recognized that, too. The humiliation underneath the anger. The wounded pride of a man who had been made to feel uncertain in his own certainty. That was the most dangerous version of him. Nothing happened, she said, and kept her voice even. I collapsed at the school gate. He helped me up. That's all. He's been watching this house. She didn't answer. Derek's hand came up and she flinched. She hated that she flinched. Hated that it was involuntary. That 4 years had made it a reflex, but he didn't strike her. He put his hand against the door frame, blocking her exit, which was a different thing. A deliberate thing. You think I don't know what you've been doing, he said quietly. You think you can go behind my back and I won't find out. I haven't done anything. His face was very close to hers. In the kitchen, on the counter, she could see Lily's lunchbox waiting to be filled for tomorrow. She fixed her eyes on it and thought, not here. Not in this kitchen. Not with Lily's things in the room. I'm going to find out who he is, Derek said. And when I do, her phone was in her coat pocket. The coat with the broken zipper. The card was in the lining, but she didn't need the card anymore. She had memorized the number weeks ago, had typed it into her phone under a contact name that looked unremarkable, that looked like nothing. Derek was still talking. She reached into her pocket. He didn't notice because he was too certain of himself, too deep in what he was saying to register the movement of someone he had long ago stopped considering capable of action. She typed a single word and sent it before he finished his sentence. The word was, now? She put the phone back in her pocket. She said, I need to get Lily's lunch ready for tomorrow. He stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, confusion at the steadiness of her, the absence of the fear he was used to seeing. He stepped back. She moved past him to the counter and started making the sandwich, her hands steady, and Derek stood in the kitchen watching her with the look of a man who has lost the thread of something and doesn't know yet what he's dropped. He left the room. She heard him go upstairs. She made the sandwich. She cut it into the triangles Lily liked. She put it in the box with the apple and the small wrapped biscuit, and she closed the lid, and she stood at the counter for 30 seconds looking at nothing. Then she went upstairs and packed a bag. Not a big bag. One that didn't look like a bag that meant something. She moved quietly, efficiently. The way she moved everything, she took Lily's bear from the bed, and the photograph from the drawer, and the change purse with 42 pounds in it, and she put them under a folded jumper, and she carried the bag downstairs without looking at Derek's closed office door. She sat in the kitchen with the bag at her feet and waited. Luca's car was at the end of the street inside 12 minutes. Romano didn't come to the door. Luca had been clear about that. No spectacle, no confrontation, nothing that put her in a harder position than she was already in. Just the car, at the end of the street, available. She texted Lily's teacher first. Family emergency. Lily will be absent tomorrow. She texted her sister, who didn't know the full picture but knew enough, had always known enough, and said, we're coming. She texted Luca. At the end of the street? He replied, yes. She picked up the bag. She walked out of the house on Callaway Street without waking Derek, without a confrontation, without a final scene. She pulled the door closed behind her quietly, carefully, the way she'd learned to do everything in that house, and she walked to the end of the street and got into the car. Lily? Luca said. School. She's safe. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I'll get her after. He nodded. The car moved. She looked out the window at the street going past, at the ordinary morning city, and she thought about the specific grammar of what had just happened, the words she'd sent, the bag she'd packed, the door she'd closed, and what it meant that she had done all of it without hesitating. She thought, for years. She thought, it's done. The tears came then. Finally, the ones she'd thought she'd lost the ability to cry, not dramatic, not loud, just slow and steady and relieved, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time releasing. Luca didn't say anything. He didn't reach over or offer comfort in words. He simply let her cry, which was, she understood later, exactly the right thing. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "There's a house. Whenever you're ready to see it." She wiped her face. "Now," she said. "Take me there now." The house in Dunmore was a 20-minute drive from St. Catherine's School. It was on a quiet street with a low stone wall and a gate that didn't stick, and a garden that was winter bare, but evidently well kept in other seasons, and a front door painted the particular deep blue of something that had been chosen with care rather than left at whatever the previous owners decided. Inside it was clean and warm. Someone had turned the heating on, she realized, which meant someone had known she was coming, which meant Luca had arranged this before she'd sent him the word now. He had been ready. She stood in the front room with her bag at her feet and looked at the space: a sofa, a table, books on the shelves, a kitchen she could see through the open door that had a window overlooking the garden, and felt the unreality of it sit alongside the reality. "There's a room for Lily," Lucas said. "Upstairs, second door." She found it. It was small and yellow and had a bookshelf painted white and a bed with a duvet covered in stars. Someone had put a stuffed rabbit on the pillow. She stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Then she went back downstairs. Luca was in the kitchen making coffee, his jacket off, the sleeves of his shirt rolled back, the least formal she had ever seen him, and somehow the most real. "How long have you had this ready?" she asked. "A week," he said. She sat at the kitchen table. "A week. While I was still, I wanted you to have somewhere to go before you needed it," he said simply. "Not after." She looked at her hands. "You can't just, this is your house. You can't just give us your house. Consider it borrowed." He set the coffee in front of her. "For as long as you need." She wrapped her hands around the mug and felt the warmth of it, and thought about all the things she needed to say and how none of them were adequate. He sat across from her, the way he always sat, leaving her all the space. She said, "What happens to Derek?" Luca's expression didn't change. He looked at her steadily. "What do you want to happen to him?" She had thought about this. She had thought about it in the abstract, in the theoretical, in the quiet moments she'd allowed herself to imagine the end of this. "I want him to understand," she said, "that it's over, that he can't, that there's no version of this where he follows us, or finds some way to use Lily against me. Or he won't," Lucas said. "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm going to make sure." His voice was quiet and absolute. The same voice he'd used in the pub. The same voice that had moved a crowd of parents outside a school gate without being raised. "He will understand, clearly and permanently, that you are not available to him anymore. That Lily is not available to him. That whatever he thought he had, it's gone." She looked at him. "What does that look like?" He met her eyes. "It looks like a man who makes very different choices going forward, because the alternative has been explained to him in terms he cannot misunderstand." She held his gaze. She thought about asking more. She decided she didn't want more. She nodded. "Okay." They sat in the kitchen of the small blue-doored house and drank coffee, and outside the winter garden was bare and waiting, and Mara felt, in the specific quiet of that room, the first full breath she had taken in 4 years. She collected Lily from school herself, walking up to the gate in the pale afternoon light with the particular feeling of someone doing an ordinary thing in an extraordinary moment. Lily came running with a painting she'd made of what appeared to be a horse but might have been a dog, and Mara crouched to her level and held her for a moment longer than usual. "We're staying somewhere new tonight," she told her. "For a while." Lily leaned back to look at her face. The dark eyes, serious and watchful. "Is it the man with Sophia?" Mara said, "Yes." Lily thought about this. "Is there a garden?" "Yes." "Does it have birds?" "I don't know." "Well, look." Lily considered the horse or dog painting. "Gerald would like a garden," she said. Mara laughed, and the sound of it surprised her, full and unguarded, catching in her throat. She pressed her forehead to Lily's and breathed in the smell of her hair, the crayon and cold air of her, and thought, This is what all of it was for." They walked to the blue-doored house, and Lily saw the bedroom with the star duvet and the white bookshelf and the rabbit on the pillow, and she stood in the middle of it for a moment taking stock. "It's a good room," Lily said finally, in the tone of someone delivering a professional assessment. Mara said, "I think so too." Lily put the horse or dog painting on the bookshelf. "I'll hang it properly tomorrow," she said, and went to investigate the garden. Derek Ashworth received a visit that evening. Not from Luca. Luca sent Gio and 2 others, men chosen specifically because they were calm and unhurried and did not need to perform anything, men who had long ago understood that the most effective communication was often the quietest. They sat with Derek in his living room for 45 minutes. They explained, clearly and without theater, what Luca Valente's interest in the situation was. They explained what Luca Valente's interest in situations generally meant for the people who became part of them. They explained that Mara and Lily were, from this point forward, under a protection that was neither symbolic nor temporary, and that any attempt to locate them, contact them, threaten them, use legal proceedings as leverage against them, or involve any third party in doing so would be understood as a direct communication with Luca Valente personally and would be responded to accordingly. They left a number. They suggested he call his solicitor in the morning and begin divorce proceedings, and that he approach those proceedings with the understanding that the outcome had already been determined, and that his cooperation would make things significantly more comfortable for everyone involved, including himself. Derek Ashworth, by all accounts, sat very still for a long time after they left. He called his solicitor in the morning. The divorce was uncontested. Spring came early that year. Mara was in the garden when she first noticed it, a green thread along the base of the wall, something pushing up through the cold soil that had not been there the week before. She knelt and looked at it, and felt the specific joy of growing things, the joy that had never entirely left her even through the years when there was nothing to grow. She had planted bulbs in November, shortly after they moved in. Lily had helped, very seriously pressing each one into the earth with both hands, and they had been waiting since then with the patience that bulbs require, which is the same patience Mara had come to understand that recovery requires. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the slow accumulation of what's needed, underground, until the conditions are right. The conditions were right. Lily had settled into the new school, a school 3 streets from the blue-doored house, where she had found within 2 weeks a girl named Priya, who shared her conviction that Gerald the Pigeon was a figure of significant cultural importance. She slept through the night. She had stopped watching the door. Mara had started working again, part-time, at a florist 2 streets from the house. Ruth, the owner, had hired her after a 10-minute conversation and had not asked about the gaps. She said, practically, flowers. That's enough. It was enough. She was building something. Slowly, on her own terms, from the specific ruins of what had come before. It wasn't finished. It wasn't easy. There were still mornings when she woke in the small blue-doored house and lay still for a moment, listening for something that wasn't there anymore, the absence of it, both relief and grief at once. But she was building. Luca came on Saturdays. Not every Saturday he had things, a life, a world she understood only in outline and had made her peace with not needing to understand entirely. But most Saturdays he came, and he brought Sophia, and the girls disappeared into the garden, and Mara made coffee, and he sat at the kitchen table in the house that he owned but treated as entirely hers, and they talked. They talked about the small things and the large things, about Sophia's ongoing diplomatic relationship with Gerald the Pigeon, about the florist and the particular customers who came in for the same flowers every week like a ritual, about what Lily had said at dinner that made Mara laugh so hard she'd had to sit down. And sometimes they talked about harder things, about the past, and what it had shaped in both of them, about his sister and his father, and the scar on his forearm, and the 17-year-old who had learned patience and consequence from the specific school of having no other options. He was not easy to know, entirely. He was a man with rooms she had not been in and perhaps would never be in, a man whose world contained things she did not ask about, because some questions were not hers to ask yet. But the parts of him she knew completely, and they were good parts, she had decided. Complicated and imperfect and real, but good. She had stopped being afraid of good things. One Saturday in early March, they were in the garden while the girls dug in the far bed with the serious industry of archaeologists who expected to find something important. Luca was holding a coffee mug and looking at the green thread along the wall. The bulbs were coming properly now, the first shoots of the crocuses she'd planted. You did that, he said. We did, she said. You dug the beds. I moved soil. You knew what went where? She smiled at the garden. That's most of it, really. Knowing what goes where. He looked at her then, and she felt at the particular quality of his attention when he had decided to say something that mattered. He said, I'd like to know what comes next. For you, if you'd want to tell me. She thought about the question. Thought about the version of herself who had worn a coat with a broken zipper and walked in the rain because she had nowhere else to be. And about the version of herself now, standing in a garden watching green things push up through cold soil. She thought about what she wanted. It was still new that, knowing she was allowed to want things. I want to stay in this house, she said, long enough to see what I planted come up properly. All of it. He nodded. And I want Lily to finish the year at that school. She's happy there. He nodded again, waiting. She looked at him. I want to see where this goes, she said, carefully, without rushing anything or pretending we're somewhere we're not. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that's exactly what I want. She felt the truth of it settle between them, neither of them reaching for more than it was or less than it was. Something real and careful and built on what had actually happened, not on a story they were telling themselves, but on the specific accumulation of who they'd shown each other to be. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, real. From the far bed, Lily called, Mama, I found a worm. It's enormous. Priya says it might be a type, Sophia added seriously, of rare worm. Mara called back, put it back carefully. Worms do important work. Lily considered this. What work? They make the soil good, Mara said, so things can grow. There was a pause while both girls looked at the worm with new respect. Luca made a quiet sound beside her. She looked at him. He was almost smiling, the expression that lived at the edges of his face and never quite fully arrived, and that she had come to understand as the truest version of it. She thought about all the things that had led here. The broken zipper, the cold pavement, the voice that said step back, give her air, the scar on a forearm, the biscuits shaped like sweet peas, the card that had stayed in the lining of a coat for 11 days because she could not bring herself to throw away the fact of having been seen. She thought, I am so glad I kept the card. She thought, I am so glad he stopped. She turned back to the garden, to the green thread of the crocuses, and the two small figures in the far bed, carefully replacing a very important worm, and the pale March sky, and the apple tree that had been either very brave or very confused to hold its last fruit all winter. She thought about what she'd told Lily. Worms do important work. They make the soil good, so things can grow. She thought that was most of it, really. All the hard and necessary work, invisible, underground, the kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that doesn't announce itself, that just keeps going in the dark until the conditions are finally right. And then, green. And then, spring. And then, if you've been patient enough, if you've held on through all the long cold waiting, everything you planted coming up exactly where you put it, opening in the light like it was never in any doubt that it would. Mara stood in her garden and breathed in the cold morning air and felt, without qualification, without the waiting for it to be taken back, safe. She felt safe. And Lily was laughing, in the far bed, at something Sophia had said about the worm. And the crocuses were coming. And that was enough. That was everything. Thank you so much for staying until the end. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now were made for you. I think you'll love them. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.